Welcome back to Prophets of the Exile, Lamentations 4. So yesterday when we left off, we had some hope. We were generating hope because we had the spiritual progress that we thought we saw in poem number 3 as the poet was looking to Yahweh for restoration and interceding on behalf of his people. And we also had the hope of King Josiah, the good king who found the book of the law when the temple was being renovated, and he called the people to obedience and reinstitution of the Passover. So at this point in the story, we are hoping that maybe the destruction or the wrath of God won't be so bad as the prophets had said that it would be. But it's less than 25 years before we find out that it was bad, and the sons of Josiah who took the throne after him were wicked men, and Yahweh decided to go ahead and take down the city, his city. And so to give you a little bit of backstory, the map that I included in lesson 3 showed Babylon and Assyria and Egypt as the major powers that were surrounding Palestine. Well, during this time of Josiah's reign, Babylon continued to grow in power, and Egypt and Assyria had formed an alliance against them. And for some reason, we're not sure because it's not listed in the text, but for some reason King Josiah went out to the plains of Megiddo to meet with the Pharaoh of Egypt. And the church has assumed that he went out to try to stop or to persuade Pharaoh not to go against Babylon, but somehow he ends up dead, and we assume that he was assassinated by the king, because then the king of Egypt takes his son, who is the successor, and brings him into captivity in Egypt, takes a second son of Josiah, makes him king of Judah, and the reason he makes him king is because he's pliable, and he uses him to exact a tribute from the people of Judah that he gives to the king. And then, so we have two sons right after Josiah who are both evil. He says in 2 Kings, the writer says that the first son did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, just as his ancestor had done. And then the second son, who ruled after the first son of Josiah, he was also evil and did what was Yahweh, did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, just as his ancestors had done. And then during this time, King Nebuchadnezzar is besieging Jerusalem. Remember, I told you there was a 2-year siege. He takes a third son of Josiah and makes him king. And he takes him back to Babylon with him, and he makes him a captive. He takes the uncle, or Josiah's brother, and appoints him king, since the other king, it's kind of confusing, since the third son of Josiah is now going into captivity in Babylon, and he makes this uncle the king. And then he ends up slaughtering the uncle's sons and family in front of him and poking out his eyes. And then he takes everybody back to Babylon for an extended period of time, and there's finally a king of Judah that's still alive in Babylon, but he's a prisoner. He's not reigning. So anyway, let's read 2 Kings number 24 verse 10, chapter 24 verse 10, and catch up with the story of the sack of Jerusalem. So verse 10. At that time the servants of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to the city while his servants were besieging it. King Jehoiachin of Judah gave himself up to the king of Babylon, himself, his mother, his servants, his officers, and his palace officials. The king of Babylon took him prisoner in the 8th year of his reign. So that was Josiah's third son, who was king number 3 after Josiah. Okay? We're still less than 25 years away, so this would be 23 years away from the sack of Jerusalem. He carried off all the treasures of the house of Yahweh. That would be King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So he goes into the temple and he carries off all the treasures. All the treasures of the king's house. He cut in pieces all the vessels of gold in the temple of Yahweh, which Solomon of Israel had made. All this as Yahweh had foretold. He carried away all Jerusalem, all the officials, all the warriors, 10,000 captives, all the artisans and the smiths. No one remained except the poorest people of the land. He carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, the king's mother, the king's wives, his officials, and the elite of the land. He took into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. The king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon all the men of valor, 7,000, the artisans and the smiths, 1,000, all of them strong and fit for war. The king of Babylon made Mattaniah, Jehoiachin's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. So here we have the idea that all the elite are carried away. And of course, you know that would include Daniel and his three companions from your readings in the prophecies of Daniel. And we have this king, the final king of Judah, who is renamed Zedekiah, who is Josiah's brother. Okay. So at verse 18, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. He did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, just as Jehoiakim had done. Indeed, Jerusalem and Judah so angered Yahweh that he expelled them from his presence. Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. Now, chapter 25, verse 1. And in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came with all his army against Jerusalem and laid siege to it. They built siege works against it all around. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine became so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then a breach was made in the city wall. The king with all the soldiers fled by night by the way of the city gate between the two walls, by the king's garden, though the Chaldeans were all around the city. Chaldeans are the Babylonians. They went in the direction of the Arabah. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his army was scattered, deserting him. Then they captured the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, who passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, then put out the eyes of Zedekiah. They bound him in fetters and took him to Babylon. In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the bodyguard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of Yahweh, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down. All the army of the Chaldeans, who were with the captain of the guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried into exile the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who had defeated to the king of Babylon, who had defected to the king of Babylon, all the rest of the population. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest people of the land to be vine dressers and tillers of the soil. The bronze pillars that were in the house of Yahweh, as well as the stands and the bronze sea that were in the house of Yahweh, the Chaldeans broke in pieces and carried the bronze to Babylon. They took away the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the dishes for incense, and all the bronze vessels used in the temple service, as well as the fire pans and the basins. What was made of gold, the captain of the guard took away for the gold, and what was made of silver for the silver. As for the two pillars, the one sea, and the stands which Solomon had made for the house of Yahweh, the bronze of all these vessels was beyond weighing. The height of the one pillar was 18 cubits, and on it was a bronze capital. The height of the capital was 3 cubits. Lattice work and pomegranates, all of bronze, were on the capital all around. The second pillar had the same, with the lattice work. The captain of the guard took the chief priest Sariah, the second priest Zephaniah, and the 3 guardians of the threshold. From the city he took an officer who had been in command of the soldiers, and 5 men of the king's council who were found in the city, the secretary who was the commander of the army who mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the city. Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. The king of Babylon struck them down and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah went into exile out of its land. So, complete destruction. Everything that happened in the poem in Lamentations 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is a reflection of what we see in the narrative of 2 Kings. And we also see it again in some of the prophecies. If you were to go back to the 3 major prophets and the 12 minor prophets, you would see that Yahweh was telling people, he was warning them ahead of time that they needed to get right, they needed to obey, because if they didn't, they would lose their inheritance and the city would be destroyed. So at this point, we've seen the utter destruction of the city. And so it leaves us in a place where we are just really saddened and devastated about what happened, and we're wondering, what does this mean, and how do we apply this in our own lives? So I've got some work for you here today that I want you to do, and I hope it will take you further in your own understanding of close reading of this text, of this poetry, and also in your own walk with the Lord. I'll talk to you soon.